Welcome again, folks. My name is Maria Cardiellos. I'm the Executive Director of the IJIS Institute, and I welcome you to what is an IJIS webinar on CJIS security policies. As you all know from your current professions, your past lives, the integrity and public safety within our nation, CJIS security policy is of utmost importance in the past and most especially in our changing times. Given the volumes of individuals that we have attending today's session, I'm guessing that there might be one or two individuals that are unfamiliar with the IJIS Institute. So typically what I do is give you maybe a minute or two on the organization so that you understand why we're here together in this group today. And then I'm going to pass it to our key presenters and to key contributors to our organization. So again, the IJIS Institute, for those that are unfamiliar, is a private nonprofit that has been in an organization for nearing 25 years. It was originally seeded by the Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance with the original intent of bettering the relationship and working efforts between the public sector practitioners and the private sector service providers or vendors. So 20-something years ago, it was obviously largely on the CAD and the RMS side. Given all the world changes that have happened over these decades, be they man-made disasters or natural disasters, the need to support the justice, data sharing, and information sharing mission has grown exponentially and in some ways has imploded. Our readiness, our default nature, our expectation of having data readily available to us is in our everyday lives and most especially necessary in keeping the safety and health of our communities as high as possible. To that end, the IJIS organization today now supports a collaboration network that constitutes federal, state, county, local law enforcement, justice practitioners, police, courts, corrections, etc., as well as private sector entities that support them in all aspects of their operations. Academics, statisticians, and so many other types of practical applications and contributions to our lives. To that end, that is the audience that we support, and we provide services across the operations, whether it's focused on the operational requirements definitions, whether it is about the policies that exist or need to be drafted, or whether it is about the technical tools to support the operational missions that bring us together. So we provide many types of services, and amongst those services is this specific webinar that then supports the promulgation, the education, and the support in then successfully implementing the CJIS security policy. To those that have joined us in the past, you know very well the Chief Security Officer from FBI CJIS, Chris Weatherly. He is here today to chat with us about the most recent updates, and you all know very well that he is mastered in all these details, and we welcome him to the table. Who is also with us today, and I'm sure many of you are very familiar with Gerard Gallant of AWS. He is the leader of the CJIS program within AWS, and we're also very lucky to have him as the chair of our working group that then supports the CJIS security policy efforts and education within the broader community. I would invite Gerard to take the baton and the mic, and then if you wouldn't mind, Gerard, maybe chat a little bit about the working group, and then pass over to Chris so that he could have fun with our group today.
Thanks, Maria, and thank you for everyone attending. Pushing 650 at this minute of people to a very informative webinar related to the CJIS security policy. It's a repeat of multiple ones we've done before with none other than Chris Weatherly, Information Security Officer for FBI CJIS at the helm. Like Maria said, my name is Gerard Gallant. I lead the CJIS program at AWS, and I'm the chair of the IJIS CJIS Security Policy Working Group. That working group seeks to help educate and create content that may lessen the load, lessen the amount of effort it takes to understand all the massive volumes of changes that happen that have happened over the last several years, culminating next year with the release 6 of the policy sometime next year. So one of the things we've done is we've created some artifacts that are available on the IJIS website, and we're going to continue to create those for the remaining control families. And this is a plea for help. If anyone in the audience is interested in helping us create these artifacts, we have a structured format for the standard one and any additional artifacts that may really help local law enforcement, state law enforcement, and other users of the CJIS security policy across the U.S. That could help them understand these changes and implement them. We would certainly welcome your expertise and your effort. If you'd like, just drop in the chat if you're interested in helping, or email the IJIS Institute or myself. We would definitely appreciate your assistance. Without further ado, I know Chris is having some video challenges, so I don't think he's going to be on video, but I will pass it over to Chris Weatherly, who holds the esteemed position, as I butter him up, the esteemed position of Information Security Officer, and really is the chaperone of the CJIS Security Policy. Chris is a well-known figure across state and local, and we're happy and pleased that he's able to share some knowledge on the changes that came about in 5.9.5 and perhaps further. Without further ado, Chris, I will call on you to take the helm.
Thank you very much, Gerard. It's great to be here. Just a mic check, make sure you can hear me. We can hear me, and then we'll go ahead and share the screen here. If you could give me a verbal on that.
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So it is my pleasure to be here. I really want to give thanks to the IJIS Institute for providing me with this medium to get this information out about the CJIS security policy. I apologize. I've attempted several times to get my camera working, but maybe that's for the best that you guys aren't able to see me. So, but we'll go from there. I also want to give a shout out to the FBI Compact Office outsourcing team. I would not be where I'm at today if it were not for them. So we will go into this CJIS security policy modernization. This is version 5.9.5, but I want to give a little bit about the CJIS security policy. I get questions a lot. You know, when does it apply and what does it apply? Who does it apply to? So when we're talking about the CJIS security policy, it applies when criminal justice information is involved, and criminal justice information is defined as FBI CJIS provided data. That biometric, identity history, biographic, property, case incident history, that type of information when it comes from FBI CJIS managed information systems. So if you have a repository of just local information or state information, and it does not contain CJI, the CJIS security policy is probably not applicable to that data. Now, as an information security professional, I will tell you that data needs some sort of protection, but it may not be the CJIS security policy, and it definitely will not be the scope of an FBI CJIS audit if there's no CJI within that. One of the things the audit team one of the first questions they ask is, where is CJI flowing? Where is it resident? Where is it being stored? And that scopes the audit. As you can see on the screen there, it also provides the appropriate controls to protect the full life cycle of CJI at rest and in transit, right? Encryption at rest, encryption in transit. There are 18 security control families within the CJIS security policy covering access control, auditing, system and communications protection, system and information integrity. There's 18 of them that are available that give us the minimum set of information assurance requirements for the protection of CJI. When we get to the who, the policy applies to every individual with access to or who operate in support of criminal justice information. Unescorted access to unencrypted CJI. That is the two parameters that must be met before someone will be fingerprint-based background check and then be subjected to the CJIS security policy. Now, as agencies, you know, we tend to outsource, we tend to contract with external agencies that'll help us in the administration of criminal justice information. And that's where we get or who operate in support of. So if you're outsourcing, if you're contracting with someone to help you meet the CJIS security policy, make sure that your contract mentions the CJIS security policy. Make sure it includes the security addendum that's in the back of the policy, and that each person at that facility executes what they call the security addendum certification page. This says in a signature, I understand this, that I'm held to the CJIS security policy and our company will be audited to such. We don't create this in a vacuum. Back in 1994, Director Louis Free established the CJIS Advisory Policy Board. There are 4 working groups, regional working groups from across the U.S. There's a 5th working group from a federal perspective, but the composition of the CJIS Advisory Policy Board is 20 people from those 4 working groups. It's 5 selected by the FBI director that cover areas such as prosecutorial, judicial, correction, tribal, also represented at the APB. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, we have one from those agencies as well. We want to make sure we have the Compact Council representing our non-criminal justice agencies who are using criminal justice information. We wanted to make sure we were hitting the major associations, probation, parole, IACP, major city chiefs, county sheriffs, ASCLD, the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors. We wanted everybody at the table. And every time we make a change to the CJIS security policy, we take those changes in front of this board, and they're the ones that make the recommendation to the FBI director. Once the director signs off on it, then we will publish it into a version of the CJIS security policy, which brings me to the topic for today, the CJIS security policy version 5.9.5. You can see it was released on July 9th of this year. And it only contains one control family, and that is configuration management. But it also contains a prioritization of controls. Which controls should I implement first, second, third, fourth? How do I attack this CJIS security policy and implement it in a proper way? So we'll get to that as well. Rolling into the configuration management security control family, every control family of the 18 control families in the CJIS security policy, every control family has a -1 control. This one, configuration -1, which is policy and procedures. You'll have a configuration management policy. For locals, you'll hear me say it often, inherit what you can from the state. If the state has a configuration management plan in our policy, inherit that. Now you will have to create your own procedures of how you're meeting that policy, but inherit that policy, configuration management policy if you can. CM2 gets into baseline configuration, where we develop, document, and maintain under configuration control, the pieces of the system, like a network topology drawing. We want to make sure that we're reviewing, updating those, that configuration baseline and the topology drawing annually, or if you have changes, right? The configuration management is all about changes, but it's controlled changes, right? If you have new installations or upgrades, you want to make sure that you're updating your baseline configuration. The policy, it's become rather large, but it is a very comprehensive security plan. And when I say we, it is the APB recommends automation support for that accuracy, in particular with configuration management, maintaining the currency, the completeness, the availability of baseline configurations using those automated mechanisms. It also recommends here that we retain at least one previous version to support rollback. If you're upgrading your system, you want to make sure you have something to roll back to if and when the upgrade does not complete successful. So the APB recommends that you have at least one previous version to support that rollback. If your agency has devices that are going into high-risk areas, so I'm talking like our border states, if you have agencies that routinely go into Mexico or Canada, if they go abroad, we want to make sure that those devices are CJIS security policy compliant when traveling to those areas of significant risk. And that significant risk determination will be made by the CJIS systems officer within your state. It's very important that you know who that person is. Once those devices get back from their high-risk areas, we want to examine those devices to see if they have had any sort of tampering with them. Maybe we need to re-baseline that entire device. Maybe that's the way we examine the device, get it back to a known good, a known good configuration that we had put on the device before it left. Configuration change control, you want to determine and document those configuration control types. You want to have reviewing those changes with explicit consideration for security, privacy impacts, implementing those approved changes, retain changes for at least records of those changes for at least 2 years. And you want to make sure that you monitor and review those change activities. But you want everybody, before you get ready to make a change to a system, you want a lot of people around the table talking about that. You want your network admins, your database admins, system admins, security, of course, your privacy in there. You want everybody in there to know this change is getting ready to happen. Does anyone have concern with us rolling this change forward? And that you'll get into a change configuration change board is what will be recommended. But we want to test and validate, document those changes before finalizing implementation. If you have the ability to test your changes before implementing them, if you have that ability to put them on a non-operational environment just to test to see how they're going to work, I recommend you do so, right? You don't want to use your operational environment as a test bed. A lot of agencies don't have this luxury. So, that's the reason they say retain at least one previous version for that configuration rollback. And as I was saying before, we want to make sure that our organizational personnel with information security and privacy responsibilities are members on that change board. We want to make sure that they are seeing the changes that are happening to the system. You wouldn't want a change to be rolled onto the system that would degrade your security, that would degrade your privacy and make your system more susceptible to risk by making this change. So we want to make sure that everybody's around the table in favor of this change before we roll forward. Make sure we're looking at impact analysis on the changes that we're making. What is this change going to do? Is it going to have potential security or privacy impacts, right? Testing it before we roll it out there. After you make the system changes, you want to verify those controls are operating as you intended them to. Are they producing the desired outcomes? Also having access restrictions for change, enforcing those physical and logical access restrictions for change. Not everyone, let me say it this way. Not everyone should have the ability to put change on the system, right? You want those people who have been properly trained, who have the proper access, physical and logical access to make these changes. That is who needs to be able to make the changes on the system. When we talk about configuration settings, the APB wanted to put forward a list of best practices or documents that had best practices for configuration settings. The ones that are recommended here: DISA, the Defense Information System Agency, STIGs, Secure Technical Implementation Guidelines. So the DISA STIGs has configuration settings for almost everything that exists out there, from an application to a system level to an operating environment, database settings, anything out there. The DISA STIGs most likely has DISA most likely has a STIG, Secure Technical Implementation Guideline, for that application, for that device, for that system. Also, the Center for Internet Security has benchmarks, and let's not forget our Federal Information Processing Standards. So when we talk encryption, we want to make sure that we're within that FIPS, Federal Information Processing Standards. Some of this is a no-brainer. We implement the configuration settings. Got it, right? But maybe there's times when you can't implement a secure configuration, and so you need to identify, document, and get those approved, from your CJIS systems officer within your state, so that they are aware, hey, I wasn't able to implement this secure setting on this particular device, and here's why. Here's what it breaks. Here's what it does. So you want to make sure that you get those approved, those deviations. Monitor and control the changes to the configuration settings. Is someone in our system? Is someone making changes in our system? Is it an approved change that went through our change configuration board? Is it someone with nefarious action or intentions? Is that who's in our system changing our configuration? So we want to monitor and control changes to those configuration settings. The CJIS Security Policy is a very cyclical document. It a lot of the controls depend on each other. And this one next one here is an example of that. CM7 talks about least functionality. AC6, Access Control 6, talks about least privilege for the user. CM7 talks about least functionality for the devices within the network, making sure that they're configured for the essential capabilities to meet that operations. But we want to prohibit what is not required. We don't want to take a firewall out of the box, put it into the architecture. It's going to work. Traffic is going to flow, but there'll be no discretion on how the traffic is flowing, and no blocking of anything, any particular ports or protocols. Once you get those, that least functionality, you want to review that at least annually during system changes. So when you put a change on the system, everybody had approved the change. We put the change on the system. Did it mess with our configuration? Something we need to look for. Another time when you need to look at that review of those configurations is when an incident occurs. You're looking for that unnecessary non-secure functionality, and you want to disable or remove that unnecessary non-secure functionality. Start with that. I'm probably getting a little ahead of myself, but start with a closed architecture. Start with your firewall closed, right? Nothing is flowing through it. What do I need to flow through it? Well, I need from this machine to this machine across this port and this protocol. Put that in as a firewall rule. You need that for operation. You need that for your mission to be successful. So that's the reason we say, deny all permit by exception, as you can see there in CM7 Enhancement 5. Deny all permit by exception. Also look at that list annually. Do we still have our deny all permit by exception rules within our firewalls, within our routers, with our access control list, within everything about our system? Is it still set for that least functionality? System component inventory. You need to develop and document a system component inventory that, one, accurately reflects the system, that it is comprehensive, and it's granular enough for tracking and reporting. And review and update that annually, as you can see there, at least annually. Let me say it that way. But this comes into play when you have, let's say you have a security event. Something is happening within your system. You need to know where it went, where it traversed. You need to have that documented system component inventory. Also helpful when you're patching, when you're doing flaw remediation or SI2 flaw remediation, patching the system. You, as it says there, be granular enough for tracking and reporting. If a new patch comes out and it only affects certain versions of a certain piece of software, you will know by looking at your system component inventory, yes, we need to patch this system, and that's it, because we have been granular enough for that tracking and reporting. Another no-brainer, update your system component inventory during component installs. If you pull something out of the network, make sure you update your system component inventory. If you have updates, you're doing your flaw remediation, your vulnerability monitoring, and keeping your system update, make sure you update your system component inventory as well. Again, this is helpful when we're looking at security events that may turn into a security incident. It's also helpful when you're doing flaw remediation on the system, and use automation where you can. It's really going to be helpful that you can use this automation. But in this particular control, we're looking for unauthorized components, hardware, software, firmware. What has come onto the system that we didn't know about? We want to do that using automated methods, either through that continuous method or at least weekly, scanning that system. Hey, there's a new IP address that showed up on the network. Where did it come from? Did somebody infiltrate our system and now they're setting up virtual machines within our system? But looking at those, looking for those unauthorized components at least weekly, but if we can do it in an automated fashion, that allows our incident response to happen much more quickly. Having that configuration management plan, which addresses the roles and responsibilities, it gets your management buy-in on that. You can see establishes process for identifying. It's reviewed and approved by organizational personnel with information security. This is normally in the criminal justice world, this would be your local agency security officer or your ISO. Could be your CSO as well, your CJIS systems officer. On a non-crim side, it could be your authorized recipient security officer, your security point of contact. But we definitely want to have this configuration management plan. We want everyone's buying on it. Everybody's bought into this process. Everyone's looking at the changes before we put them on the system. And the last bullet there, very important, protect that configuration management plan from unauthorized disclosure modification. You've gone to some painstaking measures to make sure that this configuration management plan is one that everybody agrees to. You've identified your configuration items. You have your configuration change board. You know how your system is set up down to it's granular enough to know what pieces of hardware, software are running. You don't want that to get out to our adversaries, because they will definitely use that playbook against you. Software usage restrictions. This is using software and documentation under those contract agreements and copyright laws. And then CM11, user installed software. Does everybody need to be able to install software on the network? I would argue no. So we want to make sure that we have those agency level policies governing the installation of software by users, enforcing those policies through automation, as we said before, and then monitoring compliance through those automated methods. What new software has shown up on the system this week? What new hardware has shown up on the system this week? Was it something we were expecting? Or is Chris now trying to download MP3s from a foreign national service? So that's what we're talking about here. Monitor, knowing what software is on there. Does everybody need to have the ability to install software? No. Information location. This is just saying, okay, I know where my servers are. They're located in these certain part of the building. They're in this rack within the data center. But identify those and the specific components that process, store, or transmit CJI. As I was saying in the earlier part of this broadcast, that when the CJIS audit unit steps into an audit, one of the first questions they're going to ask is, tell us where criminal justice information is flowing. Where is it stored? That scopes the audit. It's something we ask in the ISO office routinely when we're reviewing, assisting a state with implementing something. Where is CJI flowing? Is it flowing across this wire? Is it encrypted in transit? Is it stored on this device? Is it encrypted at rest? But it helps scope the audit. It helps you get a better understanding on your system and understanding where criminal justice information is flowing. You can use automation, as you can see in CM12.1 there, to identify CJI. Criminal justice information, think about a III response or criminal history response. It has certain attributes, has certain types of information. You can query the system looking for that type of data, and it will help you identify where criminal justice information is flowing. So that was all of configuration management. That was the CJIS Security Policy version 5.9.5, which had the newest security control family of configuration management. Now I want to talk a little bit about the how. How do we go about implementing the CJIS Security Policy? The APB and the Compact Council came to me and said, Chris, man, this document's getting big. I don't understand the words in it. How do I implement this thing? So to that point, we started looking at a 3-step solution. We wanted to, and when I say we, I'm talking about the FBI CJIS ISO office started this, but of course we ran it through the APB and the Compact to get their buy-in as well. But we wanted to identify a subset of controls for immediate implementation to significantly reduce risk. Second part of that was allow for a 0 cycle audit for those remaining controls. And then lastly, create a priority tiering matrix to assist in implementation during that 0 cycle. So let's step through these a little bit. Step 1 was, like I said, the controls for immediate implementation. We, FBI CJIS ISO and some representatives from Inlets, used the MITRE attack data, and we cross-mapped that to NIST 800-53 Rev 5.1 at the moderate baseline. NIST 800-53 Rev 5.1 at the moderate baseline can also be called the CJIS Security Policy. That's what it is mapped to. That is what it is created off of. The organizationally defined values were established by the CJIS Advisory Policy Board. But we cross-mapped those that pairing to the number of attacks with each individual control. As you can see an example there, MITRE lists 332 attacks associated with control SI4, which is Information System Monitoring. So doing a little mathematical equation there, we come up with a risk score of 54, and any control that had a risk score greater than 50, equal to or greater than 54, we listed it as a priority 1, and that resulted in about 73 controls and control enhancements scoring above that average. So priority 1 controls on the system now considerably knock down your cybersecurity risk. Then what do we do with the rest of those? The rest of the controls that are within the CJIS Security Policy. The APB wanted a 0-cycle audit for those remaining controls. And what that means, if in version 5.9.5, we have identified each control by its priority, and there also may be the word existing by that control. If it's a priority one or an existing control, it is sanctionable now by the CJIS APB, which means it'll be brought in front of the Compliance Evaluation Subcommittee to understand why you're not compliant. And let me say something here that my acting assistant director has said many times in a public forum: we're in this together. We're not going to put this CJIS security policy out here and then, wait for you to implement and then come along and ding you. We're going to try our best to help you implement it so that we're all secure. But this, this 0-cycle audit. So if you have priority 2, 3s, and 4s listed within the CJIS security policy that are not listed as existing, they will have a 0-cycle audit. And that's roughly about 56% of the controls. They will become sanctionable after the 0-cycle audit period has ended. And you can see the last bullet there, that 0-cycle time frame started 1 October 2024, and it will end 30 September 2027. And then lastly, the step 3 was at creating that priority tiering matrix. And we want you to implement the other controls. When I say other controls, I'm talking anything that was not existing or priority 1. So those priority 2, 3s, and 4s, implement a priority 2 first, which makes it easier to implement a priority 3, which makes it easier to implement a priority 4. That's the prioritization that we feel you should go forward with. So priority 1s immediately, existing immediately, priority 2, 3s, and 4s in that order. What I want to do, this is a list, I think it was 73 or 76 controls that are listed as priority 1. And you can see the controls here. And today in our seminar, I want to go through each of these controls to let you know what the priority 1 controls are. What you will not find here are the existing controls that existed in version 5.9. But I do want to walk through these controls here because, like I said, they definitely knock down your cybersecurity risk immensely. The first one, access or AC2, account management. You want to define the types of accounts that are allowed, what's prohibited. You want to have access authorizations or attributes for each of those accounts, and those access authorizations equates to privileges. Wouldn't it be nice if you came to the front door of CJIS and said, CJIS, FBI CJIS, tell me what you know about Chris Weatherly. And CJIS goes off and does the work, comes back and says, here's what I know about Chris Weatherly. I've queried NCIC, III, Index, NICS. I've queried all these systems on your behalf. And here's what I know about Chris Weatherly. And then you come back and say, okay, CJIS, thank you very much. If you get something on Chris Weatherly within the next 30, 60, 90 days, let me know. That would be nice. Right now, you have to know what system you're intending to talk to. Are you making an NCIC query? Are you making an index query? III, criminal history record information. Are you making those type of queries? But the way we get to this one CJIS search is that the identity, when it shows up at the front door, it must have access authorizations associated with it. Does it have, and that's what we're looking at on the screen here. Does the identity have the NCIC certification indicator, which means the identity has passed their NCIC certification training? Do they have the index privilege indicator? Are they a public safety officer, or are they a sworn law enforcement officer? Multi-factor authentication. At what authenticator assurance level did they authenticate? Have they already multi-factor authenticated, or do I need to present them with another challenge? These are the elements that need to be associated with the identity when it shows up at the front door of CJIS when we start this one CJIS search. These, a lot of people may look at these as inhibitors, but I look at them as enablers. I'm enabling that identity with the right attributes to get, and you've heard me say this many times, the right information to the right person at the right time. Also on account management, requiring those approvals, you were notifying the account manager, system network admins one day, and when the accounts are no longer required, maybe the need to know changed, the user terminated or transferred, authorizing the access based on the attributes and intended system usage that we can see there. We want to review our accounts annually, at least annually. Or, if you're using group accounts, if you allow group accounts, everybody would have to identify themselves. But if we allow group accounts, what's the process when someone's removed? What if someone gets a new job and they leave your agency? We need to, what's the process for that group account, looking at that group account. As I've said before in this presentation, use automation where you can to support that account management, email, phone, text. These are versions of automation. AC22 could be a control that you simply answer not applicable. Does your system allow temporary or emergency accounts? If the answer is no, not applicable, move on, right? However, if your system allows these temporary emergency accounts, they must be removed within 72 hours. And a temporary emergency account gets somebody on the system. You have an incident going on. I need you on the system now doing your part of the mission. You're on. I've got you on the system. But within the next 72 hours, I'm going to start identity proofing you. I'm going to start making sure you get the right credentials, you get the right access authorizations to have a normal account versus this temporary or emergency account. AC2 Control Enhancement 3, disabling the accounts within 1 week, that it's expired. Maybe the account hasn't been used for 90 days. Definitely want to get it off the system to lessen our attack surface. Automatically audit the account creation, modification, enabling, disabling. And if you're starting to see a theme here, we've already covered access control in one of our previous webinars, but these are considered those priority 1 controls that help lessen our cybersecurity risk. Inactivity logout, you want to require the user to log out when a work period is complete. Now, a work period could be 4, 8, 16, 12. I don't know how long your work period is, but we want to require the user to log out when they leave the system and they're not intending to come back. They didn't go on a break. They didn't go to lunch. And the reason we do this is because we want to kill all the sessions that are associated with that user. Now, we do have this control. Here's a management control that we'll teach the user, we'll train the user, we'll make them sign a rules of behavior that says we will need you to log out when your work period is complete. If the user forgets to do so, then there are automated processes that'll help us with that logging out. But that's in another control family. If you have a disgruntled employee or you learn that there's a direct threat to confidentiality, integrity, or availability, we definitely want to disable that account within 30 minutes of discovery. You have a disgruntled employee. We don't want that employee leaving Easter eggs for us to find later, or some sort of something that would disrupt the system once they're out of the building, possibly a week or so later. We just want to make sure that we disable those accounts within 30 minutes of discovery. And enforce those approved authorizations for logical access. We do that using the AC2, and the system is also set up for that attribute-based access control. Allow people to have access to elements of their PII. This will help keep your system up to date from a PII enforcement, or from a PII point of view. Controlling the flow of information. We should never have unencrypted criminal justice information flowing across the public network. When I say public network, think about something you do not control, i.e. the internet. One tactic that that can be used is that if you have we have non-external routable IP addresses. Think 10 dots, 192, 168, 192. They should never show up on your front door, looking to be like they're inside traffic, trying to get back into your system. That should never happen. And then lastly, in that one, we want all of our web requests to go through web proxies, gateways, firewalls, or something as they're surfing out to the internet or to those public networks. Separation of duties, identifying and documenting those. AC6, we talked about earlier in the presentation, just enough permission to complete your part of the mission and nothing more. Authorize access to those security functions. You want to make sure that you authorize access to those privileged users. We're talking about security relevant information in like your hardware, software, firmware, things like that. Non-privileged access for non-security functions. Don't log into the system using your privileged account. Don't come into the system as admin. You want to come in as your regular self, and then when you need to do administrative functions, go ahead and switch user over to that administrative account. Making sure we look at these privileged accounts, restricting those to privileged users and reviewing those at least annually. Make sure you reassign or remove to correctly reflect the agency's needs. Of course, we want to log the execution of the privileged functions, prohibit the non-privileged functions, users, I'm sorry, from executing those privileged functions. Don't let Chris Weatherly, the general user, don't give him the ability to configure your firewall, right? Prohibit those non-privileged users from executing privileged functions. If you have remote access, and I'm talking about access from outside of the system or network that you control, you want to establish and document it. You want to make sure that you authorize each type prior to allowing. Make sure you monitor and control that remote access. You want to make sure that we are protecting the confidentiality and integrity using encryption. Remember, we said we didn't want unencrypted criminal justice information flowing across the public network. So we're using virtual private networks for signing for our remote devices signing in. If you're running a web page, a web portal, making sure we have transport layer security, at least version 1.2. Get to 1.3 if you can, but we want to have at least 1.2 TLS on that web portal. If we're using 1.2, make sure we're looking at disabling the weak ciphers. There is software out there that will test for those weak ciphers. If you can get to 1.3, it automatically removes those weak ciphers. AC 17 control enhancement 3, managing those access control points, right? Making sure that these remote access that are coming into your system are going through some sort of security stack, making sure that the system on the remote end is properly configured, making sure it's properly patched, that it has the latest version of anti-malware on it. AC 17.4 talks about those privileged commands where you have a compelling need for someone outside of the network to come into your network and execute privileged commands. Think about the worst case scenario. It's 2 a.m. The system is down. We need somebody, there's 6-8 inches of snow on the interstate, maybe more. And we need our firewall admin to be able to remote in to get something, or a database admin to get them to remote in to fix that database. That is a compelling need. We want to make sure that it's documented and the rationale is documented in our system security plan. Make sure that your CJIS systems officer is aware that we have this compelling need coming through the system. If we have use of external systems, we want to make sure that those systems, that we have policies governing the use of those external systems. This is the control that speaks about BYOD, bring your own device. If you're allowing BYOD, Chris is not a fan of BYOD because it puts the user's device possibly at discovery. So, and I have I have a state in the South that has a user that has lost their phone. Right now, we're up to 4 years, or approaching 5, because they used their phone for criminal justice information, and it was part of discovery on a case. So either you put policies, procedures around that device, or you just simply prohibit the use of BYOD. Limits on authorized use, permit authorized uses, individuals to use that external system after you've verified the controls on that external system. You have configuration management on your system. You have auditing. You have multi-factor authentication. All of this exists on your CJIS compliant system. Now, before you allow somebody to process criminal justice information on an external system, you want to make sure that you're looking at that system, that it has at least the same level of security on it that your system has. The last one on this screen is the portable storage devices, restricting that use. Think about someone, an officer or someone going out to a crime scene and taking one of their agency thumb drives and putting it into the camera system at the gas station, pulling that information down and bringing it right back into your controlled environment, putting it into the desktop, and malicious code goes everywhere. That's what we don't want. So we want to restrict that controlled portable storage device on external systems. Look, I know that's a great way to get video back into your system so that you can analyze it. But once you bring that thumb drive back into your controlled environment, scan it on a standalone system that has updated malware signatures on it. Make sure that device is clean before we put it back into our configured system. CM2, these are priority 1 controls. We've already discussed these. This is that baseline configuration using the automation. The previous configurations, high risk, access control, access restrictions for change, using the DISA-STIGs to configure your devices, least functionality. These are all priority 1s. Deny all, permit by exception. having that system component inventory, when to update the inventory, looking for those unauthorized components. And then we get into identification and authentication. This has been a hot topic over the last year. Back in December of 22, the APB said, Chris, we understand we need multi-factor authentication, but we want at least 2 years to implement. And guess what? That 2 years has went by fairly quick. So starting October 1st, the CJIS audit unit is looking for multi-factor authentication. You need to uniquely identify and authenticate the users and processes acting on behalf of those users. You need to use multi-factor authentication for privileged accounts, multi-factor authentication for non-privileged accounts. I like to sum this up by saying it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, multi-factor authentication. What about multi-factor authentication in a criminal justice conveyance? Yes. What about multi-factor authentication within a manned 24-hour dispatch center? Yes. Multi-factor authentication, no matter who you are, where you are. We want to make sure that those authenticators are replay resistant, that a bad guy cannot sit on the wire, watch you authenticate to the system, and replay that authentication session later to become you. IA 212 could be not applicable as well. If you accept PIV credentials, then you must be able to electronically verify those PIV credentials against a federal PKI bridge. Within the authenticators, IA5 here, there are several controls that apply to all types of authenticator. You can see here changing the default authenticator prior to first use. This would be like getting a new piece of hardware in, and to log into it to configure it's admin, right? Definitely wouldn't want to change everything about that because now that's published on our public networks. So we want to change those default authenticators. Changing or refreshing certain types of authenticators annually or when there's been evidence of authenticator compromise. What my point here is that there are certain controls that are applicable to no matter what type of authenticator, and I'll clarify that a little more here in a bit. As far as managing, there are 12 general controls for authenticators. If you're using biometric authenticators, there are 12 controls associated with that. For binding the authenticator to an identity, 25 controls, 17 for session reauth. You can see there's 10. Authenticator assurance level 2, there are 15. The reason we're at an authenticator assurance level of 2 is because criminal justice information has been deemed a moderate impact to the loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So that puts us at an authenticator assurance level of 2. There are 9 different types of authenticators within the CJIS security policy. One of the things I say here is that know what type of authenticator you're using within your system and focus on those controls only. As I said before, there are controls or parameters, information security requirements for all authenticators. But if you're using a memorized secret, which is a sexy word for password and PIN, there are 20 additional controls for that memorized secret. There are 20 additional controls for out of band, 20 additional controls for one-time password, 17 for cryptographic. And if you have a lookup secret, there are 14 controls associated with that type of authenticator. If you're using PKI, make sure you're validating the certificates down to the accepted trust anchor and also implementing a local cache or revocation. Should your system go offline, you want to make sure that you're able to look at that certificate to see if it's had recent revocation. IA56 is a gimme control. You've already passed that one in your audit. Because you've implemented the CJIS security policy, you are protecting the authenticators commensurate with the security category of the system to which the authenticator permits access. Rolling into risk assessment. RA5, again, a priority 1 control, monitor and scan monthly. We're scanning our systems monthly, looking for those vulnerabilities, making sure we're up to date with our flaw remediation, our patching, making sure we're up to date with vulnerabilities that have crept up in our hardware, our firmware, our software. We want to make sure that we are remediating those vulnerabilities within 15 days if it's a critical, up to 90 days if it's a low. But we are monitoring and scanning our systems at least monthly. The last bullet there says employee vulnerability scanning. employ vulnerability monitoring tools that are readily updatable. And that leads us into RA 5.2 that says before we start running a scan, at least 24 hours before we run the scan, we're going to make sure that we update that scanner to make sure that it does have the latest signatures and vulnerabilities to look for. You want your vulnerability scanner to have privileged access. You want it to be able to dig down through your system, get into those registered keys, looking for those configuration settings that you may have missed, right? We want to find the vulnerability or the flaw. We don't want our adversaries to find it and start to exploit it. RA 5.11, if you have a public website, make sure that you have the ability for the public to tell you, hey, your website is susceptible to this type of vulnerability. Make sure that you have that public reporting channel that they can tell you, hey, I was actually starting to mess around with your system. It's subject to this type of vulnerability. So make sure you have that available. When we get into systems and communications protection, priority one control, boundary protection, making sure we have those extra, we're monitoring and controlling those external managed interfaces. If you have publicly accessible systems within your architecture, make sure they're either physically or logically separated via subnets, so that you do have that separation between your publicly accessible systems versus your private, your network systems. Access points there at the bottom, limit the number of external network controls. This goes back to that those remote accesses that we talked about in AC 17. External telecommunication services, make sure you have a managed interface for each one of those telecom services. You have a traffic flow policy for those. If you have exceptions to that traffic flow policy based on your mission or business needs, make sure you document those or reviewing those annually. The last three bullets there are talking about secure DNS, where you're preventing that unauthorized exchange of external control plane traffic, detecting unauthorized internal control plane, and then filtering that unauthorized external control plane traffic. Again, that gets back to secure DNS. Here's another one, deny by default, allow by exception. We've heard that once already today during this presentation. Split tunneling, if you have remote devices that are VPNing into your network, they should not be able to get to the internet without coming back through your architecture. So we don't want somebody going to the internet, to the dirty internet, that's not coming through our security stack somewhere that we can control that traffic, right? That's what split tunneling is. We don't want that. SC78, routing that internal traffic to all untrusted networks through a proxy server. This goes back to AC4 that we were talking about. Again, the CJIS Security Policy is a cyclical document. Everything comprehensive. Almost every control relates to something else. So, personally identifiable information. Make sure you have the processing rules for that. You're monitoring for that. You don't want to send unencrypted CJI for sure, but do you want to send unencrypted PII out on the public internet? Definitely a good way to end up in some sort of lawsuit. SI2 is that flaw remediation, patching the system, patch your systems. Test those patches before you put them onto the system. Make sure you're getting those relevant software and firmware, within 15 days if it's critical, down to low for 90. This is where that configuration management plan comes in that I was talking about. If I know what the system is down to a granularity, I know which systems I have to patch. You can see there incorporating flaw remediation into the organizational configuration management process, which is how we opened our session today, talking about configuration management. This says, determine if those system components have applicable security relevant software firmware using vulnerability scores at least quarterly. That should be at least monthly. This is something I need to change. But if you do have a security incident, you want to scan your system again as you're part of that incident response when you're coming through eradication and then preparation for the next one. Make sure that you are scanning your system before you bring it back online. As far as malicious code, just making sure we have malicious code implemented at system entry and exit points that they're looking for those malicious code. Automatically update those virus signatures. Perform periodic scans of the system at least daily. Scan across your system daily looking for those malicious code. If you have files from external sources, make sure you're scanning those files before they come into the system, as you can see there at network entry and exit points. If you get a piece of malicious code or suspected, we're quarantining that malicious code. We're taking those mitigating actions, shoving it into a VLAN or a subnets and telling someone about that. Hey, I've found what I think might be a piece of malicious code. You should go check it out, right? And that's what SI3C2 talks about there. System monitoring, as I said before during the prioritization, there are roughly 300 and some attacks. This control can help mitigate this. In Chris's opinion, this is the #1 control within the CJIS security policy. But we're monitoring the system. We're keeping our eyes on the system, looking for attacks and indicators of potential attacks. We're using our IDP, intrusion detection prevention logs, looking for that. Our malicious code protection, vulnerability scanning, audit record, network monitoring, firewall monitoring, looking for those unauthorized local network remote connections. This is the control that we need to implement first, monitoring that system. We'll see here, I think maybe on the next screen, but we'll talk here, adjusting the level of system monitoring activity when there's a change in risk. I had a friend who was from the great state of Missouri, gave me a briefing on Ferguson when it happened and how the city and even international actors were targeting the police department's systems because of what was going on, the riots that were going on there in Ferguson, Missouri. So we need to adjust the level of system monitoring activity when there's a change in the risk. If something going on in the nation that we think, we need to look at our level of system monitoring. The last one there, providing these IDP systems, all these things that we mentioned before, making sure we're getting those logs over to the organizational personnel with information security responsibilities, at least in a weekly fashion. It'd be nice if they could have it continuously daily, but at least weekly, send that over there. And using that automation to help us do that. This is where I said I was getting a little bit ahead of myself, but determining that criteria for unusual traffic, unauthorized activities. If I know what unusual traffic looks like, if I know what normal traffic looks like, unauthorized or unusual traffic should be easier to spot. We want to alert our organizational personnel with system monitoring responsibilities when we have inappropriate or unusual activities with security or privacy implications. Looking at our software, this ties back into configuration management. We configured our software. We want to know if somebody's in there messing with our systems. And we do that through integrity checks of software, firmware, information systems that process criminal justice information. We want to do that at transitional states. Transitional state would be like startup, shutdown, reboot, things like that. Or security relevant events, or at least weekly, and then using some sort of automated fashion. If we find that we have detection of unauthorized changes, we want to make sure that we get that into our organizational incident response capability. And we're looking for those unauthorized changes to those configuration settings, or if you have someone who has unauthorized elevation of system privileges. That completes the priority ones. Again, just to reiterate, the priority 2, 3s, and 4s that were not existing, part of version 5.9, during that 0 cycle period from 1 October 2024 to 30 September 2027, non-compliance will be noted, but it will not be sanctioned by the CJIS APB. But all the controls within the CJIS security policy, even the priority 2, 3s, and 4s, must be implemented by October 1, 2027. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I do want to give this email address here, iso@fbi.gov, if you have questions related to the CJIS security policy. We're interested in it. Know that when you send that email to us, there are only 3 of us, myself, Deputy Jeff Campbell, and we have contractor support Holden Cross. And there are 3 of us for the nation. So it may take us a little while to get back to answer your question. But when we do respond, if you're not the ISO of the state, we're going to copy the ISO of the state on our response so that he or she knows that we are talking to you, and they may have local, more local requirements than we are aware of. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I want to pass it back over to the IJIS Institute, and we'll start answering questions.
Okay, Chris, we've got several questions that I did make reference to and did respond to with regard to whether this taping would be available, and the unequivocal response to all those that listed it: yes, this taping will be ready. on the IJIS website, let's say in no more than a week. So I would ask you to just check back. We might do a reply all, or at least a reply to your registration, and give you that awareness as quickly as possible. But of course, the number 2 question was, will they get a copy of the slides? And Chris, I wanted to confirm that before I went to the other questions.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I will provide the Institute a PDF of the presentation, and I have no problems with this information being shared.
Wonderful. In that case, for those that asked the question or for those that are interested in it, please know that we will be sharing that with you as well, and we'll post it on our website with the taping. So then getting into some of what I believe are the remaining 20-something questions, I'll just go ahead and do what we typically do, Chris. So I'll read them out and then you interpret them. I have a question on compliance with the requirement for secrets to both salted and hashed. Microsoft's on-premises AD solution only hashes and doesn't salt. Do you have any recommendations for complying with this?
So we have had multiple conversations with Microsoft personnel as recent as last week. And I routinely ask that question, what about salting and hashing on-prem AD? The answer I was given last week was no. They will not support salting and hashing using the on-prem AD solution. And it was likened to them not supporting, Windows XP anymore. So looking for salting and hashing, they're looking for that tie-in for the agency to move into Intra for that salting and hashing. Not the answer I wanted to hear, but that's just where we are.
Understood. Do you have some sort of matrix that matches CJIS compliance standards to NIST compliance standards for auditing purposes?
So with the modernization of the CJIS security policy, we aligned it with NIST 800-53 and at the moderate level. So we went to the NIST 853, pulled down the moderate controls, and then the APB started tailoring those as they could. When you look at NIST 800-53 from an audit perspective, excuse me, there is a audit document associated with it, and it's NIST 800-53A, and that does give some auditing methods of how to audit these certain controls. But I do want to say that AC7 within 853 is AC7 within the CJIS security policy. There would be some organizationally defined values that have been tailored by the APB, but the roadmap between the two documents, the controls are the same. The only thing that's different is the tailoring, and I would recommend using 800-53A to look at how to audit these controls.
Okay, cool. Regarding MFA in 5.9.5, the policy does not provide specifics. As a second factor, we are wondering if a solution utilizing a proximity reader 4 inches is acceptable, or if a solution requiring a physical tap like a YubiKey is superior, as the former is susceptible to proximity-based vulnerabilities.
Yeah, so I just had conversations with Yubico last week about YubiKeys. So if you do have a YubiKey that you're using as a proximity, just a tap, they are permitted, but that Yubico tells me that when I do that tap, there's going to be a PIN associated with it. So the YubiKey would be something I have, the PIN would be something I know, resulting in multi-factor authentication. There's also a YubiKey that stays with a device. It's plugged into USB port, I believe, USB-A, I think. Could be, it doesn't matter. It goes into a USB port. It does have a button on it. And again, once the user hits that intent to authenticate button, it's going to request a PIN. And that's something that the user knows, therefore resulting in something I have and something I know, equating to multi-factor authentication.
Okay. Will we have any North Carolina state-centric discussion and/or training for the CJIS update?
I am close friends or acquaintances with both the CSO from the state of North Carolina and also with the state ISO with North Carolina. The CSO is Ivy McMillan. She's at the SBI. John Matthews is the ISO for the state of North Carolina. If you're looking for a state conference, I would definitely get with those two. We can have a conversation about, you know, us coming down to the state, North Carolina State Conference and having that training.
Cool. It seems like this policy involves much more than computers that access CJI. Is the goal of this policy to create an entire secure network, including systems that access CJI and those that don't, or just systems that access CJI?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And like, as I was saying before, we need to know where criminal justice information is flowing. Where is it flowing on the system? What copper, what fiber is it traversing, right? What systems is it hitting? What systems is it residing on? That'll scope where the CJIS security policy is applicable. Wherever you have criminal justice information, wherever you have people accessing criminal justice information, the people who are accessing criminal justice information, all of it hinges on properly identifying that criminal justice information, and that's when the CJIS security policy becomes the authoritative document.
Okay. Sorry if this is an old question. Is there an exception to the standard 90-day password expiration rule? I have read that organizations could extend the password expiration period to 365 days under the advanced password standards, but I cannot find this language in the policy documents.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reason we can't find that language is because I'm trying to think which version of the policy that was actually removed. So now we have the memorized, I want to say it's 592 was actually when that was removed. We did have a sunset date for the basic password standards, uppercase, lowercase, first special character, number, first, blood type of your firstborn. All those complexity things have disappeared because we went to now these pins and passphrases that the user can use. And you'll find that in IA 5.1 is where we talk about memorized secrets. There are no longer complexity requirements. There are requirements for a banned password list, that if the users or the identity's password shows up on a banned password list, it must be changed because it's considered compromised. There's also a requirement that says I'm going to bounce my directory service off of this banned password list at least every 90 days. And once I do that, doing so kind of resets the password and makes it fresh again, right? So even when we're doing it, the new, I think 6.0 will actually say refreshing the memorized secret at least annually. Well, you're doing that by doing it every 90 days. So as long as the identity's password, passphrase, whatever they choose, shows up, doesn't show up on a banned password list, that user can use that passphrase for infinity.
Okay. Where can I find the documents Chris is referencing now and before?
CJIS security policy, you can find at LE, law enforcement, le.fbi.gov. You can use a browser of your choice to search for the CJIS security policy. Make sure you're looking at the most current version, which is 5.9.5. The NIST documentation, you can find at nist.gov. And it's the number of the document is 800-53, 800-53. And make sure you're looking at the moderate control set within that 800-53. There is also on le.fbi.gov, there's also a document called the Requirements Companion Document. Deputy Jeff Campbell has coined it the stuff without the fluff, and it is just that. It has just the shall statements out of the policy in an Excel spreadsheet.
Chris, did we lose you?
I'm still here. Can you hear me? You still with me?
Yes. Yeah, we got you.
Okay. There's a requirements companion document out there that just has the shall statements, and it's in an Excel spreadsheet that is unlocked. A lot of agencies will give this to their service providers, to their vendors, and ask them to demonstrate how their hardware, their software, firmware can help the agency meet the CJIS security policy. So it's a great way to start looking at control implementation and how to document that. It's a great way to start building your system security plan as well.
Okay. A lot of your requirements will take significant resources to implement, leading one to believe that these controls are designed for large agencies. Do you have suggestions for small agencies to achieve compliance?
Yeah, so know who your CJIS systems agency is, who your upstream is. How are you getting access into CJI? How are you getting access into FBI CJIS managed information systems? Inherit from your CJIS systems agency. When we start looking at the smaller agencies, lean on your CJIS systems officer to help you with the implementation of these controls. We are assembling a listing of available funding sources to help to assist agencies with finding if they have limitations on resources, financial resources. We are putting together a list of those, but inherit what you can from your CJIS systems agency. Inherit, maybe you've got a county IT that's helping you out, maybe it's a city IT. Inherit from there. And if you have questions about that, definitely give us an email at iso@fbi.gov.
Now that the word refund is on the tape, they will be asking you about that too.
Yeah, no refunds.
No refunds. Okay. Have authentication devices like a PIV been looked at for access?
Absolutely. If you're using a PIV card or even a CAC card, a common access card on the DoD side, if you allow that as part of your way to get into your system, that's fine. What needs to happen though, you need to be able to interrogate that PIV credential by going back to the federal bridge, making sure the certificate on there is still good, making sure that all the attributes on that card are still good. So we are starting to work with at least one state who's going to start interrogating that PIV credential from a federal perspective. And once we get that successfully implemented, that'll be something we hope to post out to the community to say, here, if you're using PIV credentials, here's how it can be done.
Okay. On two-factor authentication, does the Windows login password count as the password, or does the two-factor require a separate password and PIN number?
So when we talk about logging on, multi-factor authentication is two of the following: either something I am, something I know, or something I are. And I know that's bad grammar, but something you are, something you have, something you know. So anytime when you're thinking that you could use two passwords, that's not two-factor authentication. You're still using a factor out of the something I know category. So it needs to be something I know, something I have, or maybe it's something I know and something I am, something I have and something I am. You see the thing there. There are three categories. So you need to be choosing from two of those. If you're using the Windows logon to do that, you would be using your identity, your username, and a memorized secret, a password. But if you want to accomplish multi-factor right there, you need to have either something you have or something you are, because you're already using the something I know. If you're doing multi-factor authentication at the desktop, then you may not need it at your application where you're getting access to CJI. We're working with the software community or the vendor community to look at a single sign-on solution. If I sign on to the Windows domain, then when I go to get access to CJI through a CAD or RMS or Dispatch or something like that, accepting that credential at the application level there. So, but we're still working on that. Short answer: something you have, something you are, something you know. It's got to be two of those three.
Okay. According to the recently published NIST SP 800-63-4, verifiers and CSP shall not require users to change passwords periodically. CJIS Security Policy 5.9.5 requires to change or refresh authenticators annually. Are changes expected to reflect NIST recommendations?
Absolutely. So 5.9.5, and that's one of the reasons we took a paper through this last round of the CJIS Advisory Policy Board, was because we were looking at changing or refreshing authenticators. If you have some sort of one-time password fob or something that gives you, a random 6 digits, the time to live on those things is 3 years. So why would we change or refresh that type of authenticator annually? And as I was explaining before, if we're using a memorized secret and we're using the banned password list in the way that it's defined within the CJIS security policy, we're refreshing that password, if you will, bouncing that password off of the banned password list. And as long as it doesn't show up as compromised, that user can use that password indefinitely. So unless it shows up on the banned password list, there will be no need to change or refresh that authenticator at any certain time period.
Okay. Can you explain more about the split tunneling? Is it just access to the NCIC systems? My agency does not have this set up, and we have other agencies connecting as well to access our CAD system. Is that a problem? Turning this off also bogs down our bandwidth.
So the split tunneling means if I have a resource that's outside of my network and VPNing in, let's say it that way, which a lot of people do. You know, you have your mobile device terminals that are VPN'd into your systems, and you've established that VPN. You've got that communication path that's coming back into architecture that you manage. What we don't want to happen is that officer to be able to use that same MDT that is connected to our system via the VPN to be able to search the internet with unfettered. We don't want that device to go out to the internet unfettered and, you know, relying solely on the device protections to protect us from spam, to protect us from anti-malware, viruses, and things like that. So anytime that a device needs to go to the internet, make sure it's coming back through your VPN, through your security stack, and then out to the internet so you can control that traffic. We've heard turning the split tunneling off does bog it down, specifically with certain types of applications. But that's where we are. Sometimes we need security over performance. And in this case, I would want to make sure that my system is clean if it's connected to my system.
Okay, how does a service provider validate or prove a user or entity is at AAL2? Is there a technology that does the validating of the authentication of the authenticator, or is it a manual process?
Yeah, so using that requirements companion document, your service provider can demonstrate to the agency this is how they're meeting the requirements within that. For AAL2 authenticators, we need to look at IA5. Those are all AAL2 authenticators. The security control, the APB Security Control Task Force pulled in all of 800-53 as it relates to the moderate controls. They also pulled in all of 800-63 Rev 3. I want to be clear on that. As a part of that digital identity. So if it's listed within the CJIS security policy as a certain type of authenticator, it is an AAL2 authenticator. The only thing that would be an AAL1 would be just having a requiring just a password or a memorized secret. And then AAL3 is when we get up into the personal interoperability verification, or the PIV compliant credentials. So if it's within the CJIS security policy, it's an AAL2 authenticator. So make sure that you're talking with that type of vendor. When you're talking to that vendor, make sure you're focusing on those types of authenticators listed in IA5.
Okay. Is RA 5.11, quote, establish a public reporting channel for receiving reports of vulnerabilities in organizational systems and system components, unquote, required even for agencies without a publicly accessible part of their network if they don't host a website?
No, it would not be applicable. If you don't have a publicly accessible website, then there would no need to have a public reporting channel. So that would be not applicable when you're answering your audit.
Okay. Are Google and Microsoft Authenticator apps accepted for MFA?
Yes.
I believe it was slide 53. Do you have a recommendation for probe/testing software?
So I was trying to get back to the slide presentation here to see if I could see exactly what that was talking about. If that attendee could actually put the control in there, then maybe I'll be able to answer.
Okay, and just for reference, it was an anonymous on this one, so I can't pull them back out. But if you're still with us, please give us a little bit more detail. Next question, could you please quote where in the CJIS policy there is a reference to have a need for MFA within a comm center or secure access building? Also, what is the reason for this change? Thank you.
Yeah, so the where it's quoted is IA2, Control Enhancement 1 and Control Enhancement 2, which requires multi-factor authentication for privileged and non-privileged users, no matter who you are, where you are. The reason for that is we identity proof the identity. We bind the authenticator to the identity. Multi-factor authentication, even within a physically secure location, can be, let me see, how do I say this? Single factor authentication within a physical secure location can be infiltrated. So we're looking at doing multi-factor authentication within those physically secure locations. They can be phished. A lot of nation state actors are giving up on, probing the network, trying to penetrate the network, and actually calling, they'll get pieces of an agency and start calling maybe the help desk and trying to social engineer their way into it. And if they don't have that multi-factor authentication, that is one more level of defense that we can use. But just because you have a physically secure location doesn't mean you shouldn't have multi-factor authentication. There are requirements. If you look in AC 11, there are exceptions to the device lock. And even though we multi-factored into these devices within a physically secure location, if we have devices within a 24/7 manned physically secure location, a police conveyance, a criminal justice conveyance, or a receive-only terminal, those types of devices are exempted from the device lock, which means I only have to multi-factor authenticate it one time, and then I'm logging off at the end of my work period. The reason for that was that the APB didn't want an officer responding to a scene or to a call and their system locking up as they're responding. So multi-factor authenticate at the early part of the shift, and as long as you're active, you didn't Control-Alt-Delete and walk away, go to the bathroom or to lunch, then you would never have to authenticate again. But if you do Control-Alt-Delete, go to to a bathroom break or something, once you come back, you will have to multi-factor authenticate. So I'm sorry for the long-winded answer, but if you've heard me speak before, it depends. There's a lot of navigation through this policy, and we can definitely help you with that if you send us an email at iso@fbi.gov.
Excellent. I think that the next question might have a little bit similarity in that email address. So we have a state organization of state, county, and local IT directors and managers. Who do we contact to have either the FBI or state ISO to present at our yearly conference?
Yeah, definitely drop an email to iso@fbi.gov. I'm not sure that the user is aware, but we've had significant budget cuts. If a virtual option is available, definitely we can support. But if it's traveling out to, then we may have to do make some logistic decisions. But iso@fbi.gov is definitely the way to contact us to get us to speak about this.
Oh. I am the CJIS ISO for North Carolina. I have recently fielded many questions about where MFA is now required, whether it's required in a conveyance, and whether or not the auto lock is required in a conveyance as well. Chris may want to speak to that, though I know he has discussed this in previous sessions.
So I'm glad I said I was friends with the ISO from the state of North Carolina.
There you go.
Yeah, so definitely, and that is something. And we were talking about that just a minute ago. One of the attendees was asking about multi-factor authentication within a physically secure location. That also includes a criminal justice conveyance. Yes, multi-factor authentication is required within that criminal justice conveyance. And that's where I talked about the exception in AC 11, Access Control 11, where once authenticated to that device, as long as you're active, you don't need to re-authenticate unless you get to like 12 hours. But if you Control-Alt-Delete, lock the window, lock the system yourself to go to the bathroom, to get lunch or something like that, you will have to multi-factor authenticate to get back into it. But physically secure location, receive-only terminals, criminal justice conveyance doesn't have a device lock. But you do have to multi-factor authenticate to get into them.
Okay. Are there examples of normal versus abnormal inbound/outbound traffic to trigger an incident report? Some of us are not familiar with the normal versus abnormal without a frame of reference of existing baseline in a current production environment.
Yeah, so I mean, that's going to be agency specific, knowing what normal traffic is to you. I mean, you have certain things coming through your firewall that you need coming through your firewall. That's normal. That you have, we're looking at this from a configuration management. We've only opened up these certain ports, these protocols, and if we get something that doesn't fit that design, it becomes abnormal, something we need to investigate. But that's definitely going to be agency specific on that normal versus abnormal traffic.
Okay. Where can we find specific information about MFA requirements? We have had conflicting information from vendors.
All the multi-factor authentication is found within IA5 of the CJIS Security Policy.
Okay. Is there a list of preferred vendors that we can perform comprehensive CJIS audits? And where could we find that list?
We do not maintain such. If you have a vendor that comes to you and says they're CJIS certified, call their bluff, because there is no such thing. You can be CJIS compliant, but there is no such thing as a CJIS certification. We do not maintain a list of qualified vendors or anything like that. My recommendation would be to check within your state. Sometimes the CJIS systems agency will have processes for vendors to go through, and they will quote unquote certify them for the state. And if you don't have anything within that specific state, then you may check with a neighboring state to see if they're using a specific vendor that you're interested in.
Okay, if a police officer is on patrol, are we required to lock their MDTs at 30 minutes?
Negative. That is the device lock we were talking about at NAC 11. Now, if the officer, when they're getting out of their vehicle, hits Control-Delete and locks the system themselves, then when they come back into the criminal justice conveyance, they would be required for multi-factor authentication. But as long as the officer's in the vehicle, doesn't lock the system itself, the MDT is accepted from AC 11 device lock. So no device lock at 30 minutes.
Okay. I understand that MFA is required for everyone. Let's say a dispatcher logs in with MFA at the start of their shift. They are exempt from the 30-minute session lock. Am I correct in thinking that dispatchers might only log in using MFA a few times during their shift as opposed to other users having to log in with MFA every time they lock their computer?
So yeah, absolutely. But knowing that when that dispatcher Control-Deletes and goes for a bathroom break, or Control-Deletes goes for lunch break or something like that, they will have to multi-factor back in. And I think the attendee was actually saying that they would only have to multi-factor authenticate a couple of times during their shift. Now, God forbid that we have somebody sitting at that terminal that doesn't lock their system, that doesn't walk away for a bathroom break or a meal break, and they get to 12 hours. At 12 hours, the system must re-authenticate them. But like I said, God forbid we get somebody that's having to do that.
Mm-hmm. For mobile devices, is an MDM application required by, or is policy sufficient to comply with CJIS?
So the new policy is device agnostic. You have to meet all the controls within the CJIS security policy, no matter the device you're on. Now, when you get to mobile technology, sometimes the only way to meet the requirements within the CJIS security policy is through that MDM. But you want to make sure you're meeting all the requirements of the CJIS security policy, no matter the device. Choose the best method to make sure that device is meeting all the requirements within the policy.
Okay. Does a smartphone MFA app using push notification or one-time code constitute an acceptable MFA solution?
So as long as the user is using a memorized secret in addition to that, so the user would enter their identity, their memorized secret, and then get a push notification to their phone. Yes, that would meet. If they get some sort of random code sent to their phone, definitely that would meet as well. Yeah, but make sure a device unlock, like keying in your PIN to get into your device, is not a part of authentication for CJI. It has to be something when you're accessing criminal justice information. So username, password or PIN, memorized secret, something I know, and then the system would send either that random code, I think they were saying, or a push notification to the user. Yes, that would qualify as MFA.
All right. I think we gave you that one. Are you seeing a lot of agencies moving to FIDO security keys, parentheses, cards and tokens for MFA?
I don't know that I could put a number to the number of agencies that are doing that, but some are. Yes, that is definitely a method for multi-factor authentication. Yes. I do want to make one clarification here. The policy currently says that the authenticator must be a FIPS authenticator. For state and locals, that it does not have to be a FIPS authenticator. So I do want to make that clear.
Okay. This question may have already been asked regarding MFA FIDO tokens. Are there PIN complexity requirements, parentheses, minimum length, etc., and which section details those requirements?
There are definitely PIN requirements. If the subscriber, i.e. the identity, chooses it, the PIN, then the PIN must be 8 characters. If the verifier chooses the PIN and issues it to the identity, it can be 6. Those are found under the memorized secret requirements within the CJIS security policy. I'm thinking it's under IA 5.1A. I think you'll find it down through there. If you search for the number 6 or the number 8, well, you probably get multiple responses that way, but it's definitely in that section right there.
Okay. Where is the spreadsheet that was mentioned?
The spreadsheet can be found at le.fbi.gov. Once you land on that web page, you want to look for, I think it's the CJIS Security Policy Resource Center. And the Excel spreadsheet you're looking for is the requirements companion document. I think it can be downloaded in multiple formats, but there's definitely an Excel spreadsheet there.
Okay. Is there a list of CJIS systems officers for each state?
We do maintain a list of CJIS systems officers. I don't know that it's public. If you send an email to iso@fbi.gov and indicate the state that you're in, then we'll definitely get you connected with your CJIS systems officer.
Okay. For mobile devices, smartphones that have access to CJIS data, is there an MDM required or will typical 2-factor work?
So the requirements within the CJIS security policy are device agnostic, meaning it doesn't matter what kind of device you're accessing CJI on, you just need to meet all the requirements within the CJIS security policy. With mobile devices, one of the best ways to do that is through an MDM. So I would recommend that you use something that helps you manage those remote devices, those mobile devices. Let me say it that way.
Okay. Do you consider an MDM as a compensation control if a user is accessing CJI information from a mobile device?
So that goes back to the same answer I just gave. Make sure that the device is meeting the CJIS security policy, all the requirements there within. But I would not consider an MDM a compensating control. I would consider an MDM a way to make sure that that mobile device is meeting the requirements within the CJIS security policy.
Okay. For agencies in regions subject to inclusion in the UASI grant or State Department of Homeland Security, please consider writing grants to grow your CJIS compliance program and submitting them for consideration.
Sounds good to me.
I totally agree with you. Yes, I do think that that's something that
Yeah,
can actually be factored in.
I think that statement may have been intended for our attendees.
Would agree. How many times do multi-factor need to be authenticated? Is it every time you log in, every month, etc.?
Yes, every time you log in. That would include if you step away to go to the restroom and you've locked your system, or if it timed out through inactivity, given the exceptions that we've talked about earlier in this presentation. But every time you log in needs to be multi-factor authentication.
What if your computer is a shared secured network desktop? We are a prosecutor's office and have a terminal directly routed through DPS. We use a terminal to run CCH.
Yeah, that terminal should definitely have, I understand shared technology, but that you still need to uniquely identify each identity or the processes acting on behalf of that identity on those systems that have access to CJI.
Are we required to prompt for a second factor authentication when a user is logged back into the computer after the screen locks from being idle? We have it set.
Yes.
We have it set only to prompt for a second factor again if the computer reboots, then change network, or it has been 24 hours since it's last prompted.
No, every time we log back in, even if you're stepping back from lunch or a bathroom break or something like that, within the bureau here, we use PIV cards, of course, and every time I log back in, I must insert the PIV card and enter my PIN. So yeah, multi-factor every time you log in.
Okay. A couple of these are duplicates from the previous one. So this is a little bit similar to a last. If a police officer is on patrol, are we required to lock their MDTs? I think that this one, we've already addressed this, so the person may have put it on twice.
Yeah, that's
just to
correct.
clarify, yes.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
MDTs are exempt from the device lock. I'm sorry, Maria, but MDTs are exempt from the device lock. However, if the officer locks the MDT to go to the bathroom, to go to lunch or something like that, then multi-factor authentication would be required to get back in.
Cool. Just to clarify, checking for banned passwords should be done every 90 days or every 365 days?
Every 90.
Okay. How does a service provider validate or approve a user or entity is at AAL2? Is there a technology that does?
Can I go back to the banned password thing?
Sure.
There are services out there that offer APIs, and that would actually do the banned password check continually. So that may be something, but the requirement is at least bouncing that directory service off the banned password list every 90 days. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Maria, but I wanted to clarify that question. Now, can you ask the service provider question again, please?
No worries at all. No, I was just going to say, this is enough of a juggle. We're good. How does a service provider validate or approve a user or entity is at AAL2? And is there a technology that does the validating of the authenticator, or is it a manual process?
Yeah, that was a question that was asked earlier before. If you use one of the authenticators within IA5, you will be at an AAL2 level.
Just checking because a couple of these are duplicate topics. Regard to splitting tunneling, what if we have a cloud-based proxy for those VPNing in?
So I may need a little more on this question.
All right, Dave Moulton is the one asking the question. So Dave, you might need to give us a bit more detail.
I can try to answer, but if your cloud proxy is, has the security stack in it where your devices are only accessing the internet through your cloud proxy, then that would be fine, because it is something, the cloud proxy is a device that the agency is controlling. So on the surface, that sounds like it's okay. But if Dave wants to send us an email at ISO@FBI.gov, we can definitely explore that answer a little further.
Okay. Is checking against banned passwords for on-prem AD a free feature or paid service? And have you any suggestions on products to get this done?
We do have, it's not, you must maintain a banned password list. There are services out there that are free, but the way the policy reads now is that you can use your banned password list. The way the policy will read in 6.0 is that your password list is a list of passwords that you have collected from the internet, but there are free services out there that will permit this to happen for you. And that's the one I was talking about that does have the API. I'm not going to mention the service, but if you search, use the browser of your choice and search banned password list, I'm fairly certain this site will turn up.
Okay. Any recommendations for compliance for requirement for session verification and authenticity for SC23?
So my system is no longer operating, so I'm trying to remember what SC23 is. Have that, if you could, and if that attendee is still with us, please email that question to iso@fbi.gov so that we can address it there.
And Isaac Zenger, you were the question, you posed the question, if you wouldn't mind. And if that individual can't, we'll tag you with these questions, so no worries.
Chris, C23 is session authenticity. Control the authenticity of communication sessions.
Yeah, I'm still going to ask if you, I think Maria, you said it was Isaac.
Isaac Zenger, yep.
Yeah, please, sir, send that question to iso@fbi.gov and we'll definitely get that answered for you.
Concerning cloud computing platforms, if it transmits, receives, stores, or processes CJIS data, we default to GovCloud. What is the CJIS position on government community cloud for CJIS data?
From a federal perspective, absolutely, we're held to GovCloud. Now, on the state and from a CJIS security policy perspective, back in 2017, there was a requirement that the data must remain within U.S. tribes, U.S. territories, or APB member countries. And currently, the only APB member country is Canada. And at the only time in 2017, the only way you could accomplish that was through GovCloud. However, as cloud service providers have evolved, they now permit the customer, i.e. the agency, the police agency, to select the region where their information will be held. So as long as the agency selects, it's going to be in east, west, south, north, wherever within the APB, within the U.S. tribes, U.S. territories, or APB member countries, you can use commercial cloud.
Okay, cool. If we have an MFA on the Windows level login, do we still need MFA at the Windows or web applications that are accessed using MFA-enabled PC?
Say the last part of that again.
Okay, if we have an MFA on the Windows level login, do we still need MFA at the Windows or web applications that are accessed using the MFA-enabled PC?
So I'm going to take some liberties here, and I think what the question is, if I'm using MFA at the domain level, do I have to use MFA when accessing criminal justice information? I'm taking some liberties there, but I think that's what this is meaning. As long as you're using multi-factor authentication prior to access to CJI, you will meet the spirit of the policy. We are working with service providers to accept the multi-factor authentication at the domain level. If the user has done it at the domain level, then they're protecting their system at the domain level using multi-factor authentication. What we don't want to happen is that when you go to access criminal justice information, that you're being forced to put in an identity and a password, i.e. weak credentials. We want the application, the CAD, the RMS, or whatever, to either accept the federation of the that have already multi-factor authenticated at the domain by single sign-on, or accepting a federation through SAML assertions, or OpenID Connect tokens, or something like that. But we are still working with the vendor community on that. To meet the policy, though, MFA before you get access to CJI.
Okay. For memorized secrets, parentheses, passwords, now that the basic requirements have been submitted, should we use the 5.6.2112 advanced password standards if we are using memorized secrets as one of our factors in MFA?
No, you should be using, look to make sure you have the most current version of the CJIS Security Policy, version 5.9.5. Looking under IA5A1, I believe, is memorized secrets, and that'll get you all the requirements for using memorized secrets. But advanced password, basic password standards, they have all been sunsetted by now.
Okay. How often is a user required to be prompted for MFA? Every login or every 12 hours? Is every 12 hours okay?
Yeah, every time the user is logging into the system, like at an initial login of the day, coming back from a bathroom break, coming back from lunch, every time they authenticate, it must be multi-factor authentication. Now, if a dispatcher or somebody is sitting at that terminal for a period of 12 hours and doesn't lock that terminal, then at 12 hours, the system must re-authenticate them.
Okay. There is a question about just a housekeeping question on the question and answers. Maria Myers, Maria, not only will the questions be available because they're just going to a different folder, but the responses will all be available as part of the taping. So not a problem. The next question. We currently use split tunneling due to in-car video to the cloud. Any suggestions how to allow updating of video without having to stream the video data through our VPN? This causes a lot of issues for law enforcement.
So the first question I would ask is, for video cameras, that is not considered criminal justice information. Even for body-worn cameras, that is not, the capture of criminal justice information is considered incidental. So what that means is that the CJIS security policy would not apply to that. What I would recommend, so what I think I hear you saying is that, and if I get this wrong, please email us at iso@fbi.gov. But what I think I hear you saying is that your video system is also a part of your MDT. If that is the case, then we do need to string that back through, and I can see how that would cause congestion. But if there's a way that we could separate those systems to send that video data up to the cloud on a system that doesn't have access to criminal justice information, that would be the best way to do that. But please reach out to us at iso@fbi.gov, and we'll work you through that situation.
Okay, if a laptop is employee removable from a CJ conveyance, do we have to auto lock the screen after 30 minutes?
So that was once that's a great question. I'm trying to think how we've navigated this before. If it's an MDT, it is not susceptible to the device lock, but if it's taken out of the vehicle, I mean, the user has some responsibilities here as well, protecting that asset from not being able to query NCIC or query criminal justice information. So if the officer were to leave it set, open, at the lunch table or something, and somebody starts running queries, I mean, it's definitely on their identity. So they would be responsible for the actions taken. So if they're a part of the criminal justice conveyance, no inactivity is required. So if they take it out of the vehicle, we're still going to contend to that, because I don't think you can have two of those requirements, that it's in the cradle, it's out of the cradle, if you can have different requirements. But I'm going to stick with the first answer. If it's an MDT and a criminal justice conveyance, no activity lockout is required. But it would be, you want to educate your officer to say, okay, you're taking this MDT out of the vehicle. Make sure you lock it when it's not in your possession.
All right, and as a second part to that same inquiry, do we have to suspend VPN connection after 30 minutes of inactivity, requiring MFA reauthentication to reauthenticate? ? My hunch is yes.
Yeah, in this case, the hunch is wrong, because we do have a session timeout, and I think it's 12 hours that the session can remain active. I think it's 12 hours. So that would be at the VPN level, where, if you have inactivity, that the VPN is still connected, then the session timeout would hit at 12 hours. So you wouldn't have to, if you had 30 minutes of inactivity on the VPN, that would not equate to locking the system. You can have that session open for 12 hours.
All right, and Scott Campbell, thanks you for your presentation and sharing your wisdom with everybody.
You're welcome, sir.
And the next question, does CJIS require the use of a mobile device management application for cell phones?
The policy is agnostic to solutions. So whatever the device that you're using to access criminal justice information, just make sure it meets all the requirements within the CJIS security policy. When it comes to mobile devices, one of the best methods to ensure that it meets the policy is to use a mobile device manager. Ever how you can configure that device to make sure it's meeting the policy.
Okay. Regarding the 12-hour re-authentication, our officers work 12-hour shifts and log into their device before their shift begins, anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes before. How would an agency accomplish the re-authentication for officers? Does a password accomplish this requirement?
At the 12-hour re-authentication, I believe, and it's within the policy. That's actually the first time I've been asked that question, but within the policy, it does speak, and I do believe just a single factor at that 12-hour re-authentication is all that is needed. But the policy does speak to that. I'm sorry, I just don't have that answer currently in front of me. If the user or the attendee who asked that question wants to reach out to us at iso@fbi.gov, we will definitely navigate to that piece of the policy and be able to answer the question for them.
Okay. Doesn't requiring MFA to use a bathroom a discouragement to lock the machine when they go?
So as the user has some responsibilities as well. If the user chose to go to the bathroom and not lock their terminal, any activities that were performed on that terminal during their absence would be attributed to them via audit records. So if there was any actions that were nefarious or any actions that were against organizational policy, they're going to show up under that person, that identity that didn't lock the system before they went to the bathroom.
Okay. Regarding the 30-minute lock, I can't guarantee what an officer does in the field or if and when he takes the laptop out of the vehicle or leaves his vehicle unlocked. Shouldn't we err on the side of caution and always enforce the 30-minute lockout, since I, the CSO, can't guarantee what the officer does with his laptop?
Interesting. So the APB made the decision that in the interest of public safety, and you'll find this in a couple of places in the policy, but in the interest of public safety, one particular place is under AC 11, 24/7 dispatch centers, systems within criminal justice conveyances, and receive-only terminals are exempt from that inactivity logout. Now, with that said, the CJIS security policy is the minimum set of requirements. If a CSO or an agency wants to go above and beyond the CJIS security policy, that's between the CSO and their users. But the minimum requirement is as stated within the CJIS security policy.
Okay. What is the process for submitting an anonymous request for an audit of an organization or state entity such as North Carolina?
We're focusing on North Carolina today.
And that was an anonymous. I don't know if you can submit a question out on the website, the le.fbi.gov. We do have Ask the ISO, but I'm pretty certain it requires a name and state. Boy, I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer that question from a an anonymous perspective. Okay, so if that individual still is with us, maybe you could follow up offline. If using a mobile app on a phone, can the authenticator reside on the same phone as the app?
Yes. It just has to be delivered via a secondary channel. So if you're accessing criminal justice information through a application on the phone, then the second factor of authentication must come via secondary channel, via either through an authentication app. It can come right now via SMS text, although SMS texting is considered a restricted method of delivery. So we need to be looking to get off of that. But yes, it can come to the same device, just has to be via a secondary channel.
Okay. Is it okay that fire personnel have access to the comm center and potentially see CJI data, or should they be escorted?
Unescorted access to unencrypted CJI means that the person will be subjected to personnel screening requirements. So if you do have fire personnel coming into the command center and have the ability to see criminal justice information, then you either want to clear them, which is going to be met with major resistance, or you want to escort them, or possibly, turn the CJI over, make sure your screens are not viewable from, and this gets into the physical environmental controls within the policy, but making sure the screens are not viewable to unauthorized personnel. So maybe screen protectors, some sort of screen obfuscation technology would also help in meeting the policy there.
Okay. Regarding dispatch and MFA, do they still need MFA even if they are located in a secure location?
Yes. No matter who you are, where you are, MFA is required.
Okay. Can we split tunnel if we control where the traffic to the internet site, such as our video vendor? Can we split tunnel if we control where the traffic to the internet site? We're missing a couple of words here, but.
So I think it's similar to the question that was asked before. And I'm going to say it depends, because I would like to think, I'd like to actually look at how that network is configured, how it's diagrammed out. So if that entity could, if that attendee could get in touch with us at iso@fbi.gov, then we can evaluate it further. But as far as controlling the internet, I think I see what they're saying, to say that if I say, okay, only the video of this piece can go up to this particular site, we still need to look at it, though, because that, we don't know, there's no security on that connection. We are identifying a specific site to go to, but I'm not sure the level of security that is on that connection. So please reach out to us at iso@fbi.gov.
Okay, can you explain the intent of restricted regarding using SMS for MFA?
Yeah, so texting, I think the question was SMS texting. It is currently a restricted authentication delivery method versus a prohibited. Eventually, with the tax that we have on SMS with smishing and things like that, SMS texting, or the delivery of, will eventually roll to prohibited. I don't have a timeline on that. So if a CJIS audit were to find you using SMS for the delivery of your second factor of authentication, the next question will be, what is your plan to get off of it? But like I said, I don't have a timeline of when it would be turned into a restricted. But currently today, email delivery of a second factor of authentication is no longer permitted, nor can we deliver that second factor of authentication to a voice over IP telephone as well, because they do not prove possession. But hopefully that answered the question on SMS.
Okay. To clarify remote devices, we are working on getting new remote devices, but are receiving pushback from the stakeholders because we use CJI. I am looking for more information to present to stakeholders. I guess they're looking for your suggestions to augment same or to support same.
I didn't really follow the question. I apologize.
To clarify on remote devices, we are working on getting new remote devices, but are receiving pushback from stakeholders because we use CJI. So they're looking to mitigate the pushback. I am looking for more information to present to the stakeholders. And this was an anonymous individual, so.
Yeah, I'm going to need more information on that. I'm not sure what the question is, and I apologize for that. It's just difficult to understand the question. I apologize. But iso@fbi.gov if you're still with us, and we'll do our best to answer that question.
No worries. And I will, to be respectful of folks' time, we still have 326 attendees. We know that it's past the hour, but Chris, if you still have time, we'll go through what I believe is another 10 questions or so. If not, we'll cut it at if you need to break.
Yeah, let's go ahead and try to knock them out.
Okay, if a fire department is using the same server installation of a CAD as the city's police department, do the 12-hour login requirements apply to the fire department since they do not access any CJIS data?
Yeah, if they don't have access to CJI, then no, they would not. The scope of the audit would not be for the CJIS security policy. We do need to make sure that there is logical separation between CJI and non-CJI, which is what we're talking about here. So maintain that logical separation, and no, they do not have to have the same requirements.
Okay. Is it possible to get the Q&A questions? Very helpful thinking points. And yes, the questions will be part of the tape as well. And we'll see if we can't get a separate list with the responses. NC SBI, so North Carolina SBI required FIPS compliance when they went to 2FA, two-factor authentication for OmniX users. And that is not a question. I don't see any question. That's another anonymous about North Carolina. We got lots of folks coming from there. All right, let's see. We have another question here. Please repeat the website to get the Excel spreadsheet on the stuff, not fluff.
I love it.
I don't remember the stuff, not fluff, but I'll take their word for it.
Yeah. LE, like law enforcement, le.fbi.gov. Once you get, that's the FBI's main webpage, and once you get there, you'll be looking for the CJIS Security Policy Resource Center, and that's where you'll find the stuff without the fluff requirements companion document.
Okay. Given that on-premises Microsoft AD doesn't look to be meeting requirements, and we would like to avoid cloud-based Active Directory, do you have any suggestions on authentication?
The multi-factor authentication has to be two of three things: either something you know, something you have, or something you are. So given that on-prem AD does not support salting and hashing of the something I know, then you'll need to transition to using one of something I have and one of something I are to complete your multi-factor authentication.
Is it better to have MFA at Windows logon or at the application level?
As long as you're MFAing before you get access to criminal justice information, you will meet the spirit of the policy. We're working with vendor personnel to get, when you multi-factor at the domain level, you are protecting your domain as well. What we don't want to happen is that the vendor will accept just a username and password, weak type of authentication to get access to CJI. So we want the vendor to start supporting single sign-on or accepting federation either through SAML, Security Access Markup Language, or OpenID Connect tokens. But as long as you're MFAing before you get access to CJI, you will meet the spirit of the policy.
Okay. Is Windows Hello for Business CJIS compliant for MFA?
Yes. It has to be Windows Hello for Business, though.
Okay, this is on the longer side. Going back to the password requirement, hashed and salted, it seems there is only one solution offered by Microsoft. You mentioned the solution is to move to use Entra. Would this not require using the government cloud, which is very expensive? Will this issue be discussed further, as agencies should be able to have a choice for Prem AD versus Azure AD?
Yeah. As I was saying earlier, I wasn't fond of the answer, but the response that was given to me was, you know, we no longer support Windows NT because of newer operating systems. I agree with the agency, or I'm sorry, with the attendee. There should be options, given that, and this will go back to the question I answered a minute ago. Given that, you know, on-prem AD cannot handle the salting and the hashing, then we move to something I am and something something you are and something that you have. versus something I know to meet the multi-factor authentication if you're going to stay with the on-prem AD.
Okay. If the 911 and MDTs are exempt from re-MFAing, isn't that rationale due to secure facility? And if so, why remove the secure location clause?
The dispatch, the 911 and the criminal justice conveyance are not exempt to MFA. You still have to have multi-factor authentication. They are exempt to the inactivity logout, and that's because of public safety. The physically secure location, the definition still exists within the back of the policy. Physical and environmental controls will help you establish a physically secure location. We do have some cleanup to do with the terminology and the definition of physically secure location. It doesn't really call it out as it used to within the physical and environmental controls, but if you want a physically secure location, you must meet the controls within PE.
Okay, this is a follow-up to a previous question, which I think we may have addressed, but following up to my previous question above, to confirm, no timeout required after 30 minutes if an officer stays in his car, but I have no way of enforcing if he leaves his vehicle without locking the laptop. Say they get out of their vehicle for a call and are out of the vehicle for 60 minutes. If I don't always enforce a 30-minute auto lock, are we then not compliant?
Mobile device terminals and a criminal justice conveyance are exempt from the activity logout, so the 30-minute logout. Agencies could go above and beyond the CJIS security policy, but the way the policy is written, if it's a mobile device terminal and a criminal justice conveyance, it does not have it is exempt to the device lock of 30 minutes.
Okay, this is a long one. If we only log into the state CJIS VCI database in a secured closed door non-shared space, and we do not store, print, or put documents reviewed from that database on a cloud, what is our security responsibility regarding information viewed?
So you still need to meet the multi-factor, although the state portal is the way I'm going with this. The state portal would be responsible for that multi-factor authentication. If the information is not downloaded into the environment, then you're eliminating a lot of the CJIS security policy, but you still have the preventing the unescorted access to unencrypted CGI that is on the screen. So you accomplish that via screen blockers, some sort of screen obfuscation technology. But if you're not downloading, if the portal does not allow you to download, it's a view only, then likely you're getting into elimination of the CJIS security policy. But we'd have to talk more about that. So ISO at FBI.gov, and we can definitely talk about that.
Okay. Would you kindly revisit the 90-day maximum password duration? Confirming the NIST recommendations didn't alter that in any way? I see it still states this in 5.9.5.
"90-day password expiration" in 5.9.5. That should have disappeared with the they should have a sunset date of that password expiration, or like the basic passwords, the 90-day use of it. There should be an expiration date, a sunset date on that of September 30th, 2024. It may still say it, but there should be a sunset date associated with it. But the basic password, advanced password distinctions have disappeared from the policy. And the basic passwords may still be there, but like I said, it does have that sunset date on it. But now we're moving on to passphrases that the user is able to enter.
Okay. Does logging in with MFA after locking the terminal restart the timer for the 12-hour session length?
Yes.
Okay. Should we purchase licenses and install MDM onto MDTs to wipe devices in case they are lost?
The CJIS security policy is device agnostic, so how you can meet the controls, you would need to look at media protection and how you can meet those media protection requirements for those devices. So if an MDM is the best way to erase that data, I mean, of course, you're going to have some sort of encryption at rest if you are storing criminal justice information on that device. So you'd have to have encryption at rest on those devices. So even if they were lost, hopefully your encryption at rest would cover the loss of CJI. But if MDM is the way that you want to accomplish that control, absolutely go forward.
Okay. A third-party vendor is performing construction in the area of the CJIS terminal. If one of the construction workers has a CJIS certification, are they allowed to escort the other workers?
So I have an authorized person that's been through that's been fingerprint-based background check. So so I do have an authorized person. Can they escort someone else? Yes. If they're an authorized person that has access into the physically secure location, they could escort someone, but definitely they need to be security awareness training would also have to be a part of that, and to make sure that they don't have that they're not they're protecting the information the same as you would.
Okay. Is it possible for a police department and a city's central IT department to share IT resources and network access without firewalls or logical separations if the city's IT staff has not undergone background checks and fingerprinting for CJIS compliance?
So unescorted access to unencrypted CJI was what prompts the fingerprint-based background checks. If you have shared resources like that, either anyone who's on that network is going to have that fingerprint-based background check if it's traversing CJI, because of the question they even mentioned logical separation. So if I don't have logical separation, it's a flat network and everybody has access to the same information. If you're using a shared resource like a city or county IT from a criminal justice or a non-criminal justice entity perspective, you need to make sure that there's a contract. You need to make sure that there's a management control agreement in place. Perhaps if it's a contract personnel, perhaps you need to look at a security addendum. There's a lot of ifs. There's a lot of ifs in this situation. So definitely, if that user, if I didn't answer the question for that user, ISO@FBI.gov, so that we can fully explain that.
Okay, I believe this individual is looking for confirmation of these statements. The three authentication factors are something you know, something you have, something you are. So for something you know, the example is a password or a PIN. Something you have, a physical item like a smart card, token, or mobile phone. Something you are, a biometric feature like a fingerprint, voice, or facial recognition.
The only thing I'd add in there is a one-time password would be something I have.
I have.
So like a one-time password. Yeah.
Okay, and would
The
that
PIN,
be the case for the PIN as well?
No. The PIN is something I know, because
Okay.
that would be something I know. And that stays with the user. The one-time passcode is something that's given at the time of authentication, so it becomes something I have.
Okay. All right. Is sharing CJI as documents dragged and dropped during a Microsoft Teams session? The session is hosted by a law enforcement state agency and attendees are guests of the state tenant as guest.
What was the first part of the question? If I drop CJI in that chat session?
Is sharing CJI as documents dragged and dropped during Microsoft Teams session? Does it constitute sharing, I guess? Is sharing CJI as documents dragged and dropped during a team session? The session is hosted by law enforcement state agency and the attendees are guests of the states.
Oh, the attendees, I mean, yes, that would equate as sharing. We need to protect that information, but there's a lot of ifs in this as well. The attendees that were on the call, were they authorized personnel? Do they have the ability to have unescorted access to unencrypted CJI? What about PII? I would be fearful of that, disclosing that as well.
Okay. A clarification, on-premise AD passwords don't meet the requirements for something I know. Is that due to the salt and hash?
I'm unclear as why a passphrase would not meet the requirements for something I know.
Well, they were looking for clarification, so maybe that's already part of it.
Yeah. So the passphrase or passwords are definitely something you know. The salting and hashing of that is something that was done on the backside of the directory service, where it adds a 32-bit, I think it's 32-bit, maybe it's an 8-bit salt before it hashes it. But definitely a password or a passphrase is identified as something I know.
Can state CJIS providers make MFA logins on their web portals? I know some other providers that are go-betweens for CJIS information, such as Spillman, are working on MFA to use their programs.
So the question was, can a state portal use MFA? Was that the question?
Yes. Can CJIS state providers make MFA logins on their web portals?
Certainly. Wherever you're accessing criminal justice information, that gets back into the portal discussion. If you're just accessing the information, then you're going to start eliminating some of the CJIS security policies, especially if the state doesn't permit download or print or anything like that, or bringing that information back into, the agencies where it's being requested or viewed, I should say.
Okay, got a couple of questions and then responses that they took care of. This was a great webinar. Thank you so much. I got to go.
Yeah, me too.
Yes, and I believe we may just have one more. This thing keeps procreating on me, so let's just do this one. Is if the 2FA functionality will be implemented on an RMS integration identity provider, would that also satisfy the OTP requirement asked for in the CSP? In other words, are both needed to be in place, or can one or the other be in compliance?
So I think the question is, can I use multi-factor authentication at the domain, or can I use multi-factor authentication at the application level? As long as you're multi-factoring before you get access to CJI, you will meet the spirit of the policy. We are working with vendor solutions that they'll be able to accept through single sign-on or either federation of, that the user has already multi-factored authenticated through SAML assertions or OIDC Connect tokens. But as long as you're multi-factoring before you get access to CJI, you will meet the spirit of the policy.
Okay, sorry if this was answered and I missed it. Windows Hello is considered MFA. Would facial recognition be considered MFA alone, or is another form of MFA layered on top required?
So let's clarify, it's not Windows Hello, it's Windows Hello for Business. It must be the for business solution. And the use of a biometric by itself is not a form of multi-factor authentication. That is just something you are. You would need something you know or something you have to accompany that biometric.
Okay, can the CJI be stored for discovery purposes?
I'm not sure the question there, but logs for CJI, that I don't think this is the question though, but if the audit logs for CJI must be maintained a period of 1 year unless they're needed for security or investigative purposes. The storage of CJI, as long as the information is encrypted at rest using AES 197 with a 256-bit cipher, that data is there. I will tell you that it's stale data because once you access it and pull it down, it's stale data. So therefore, there could be more current criminal justice information stored at a state or national repository.
Check for. Okay, this is actually the last question, and actually I think a very nice one. When would you like to visit North Carolina? Because they would be welcome to. They would be thrilled to welcome you with warm, open arms.
North Carolina is a short drive from the state of West Virginia, so we can definitely get in touch with me. We've done several briefings with North Carolina local government. I forget what that acronym was, but we've done briefings with them as well. And definitely get in touch with your ISO within the state of North Carolina, and they can set up perhaps a statewide briefing.
Wonderful. In that case, Chris, I can't thank you enough. You deserve a refreshment, shall we say. Please do go enjoy it on us. And I do thank Gerard for joining us, supporting the cause, and all of the attendees for staying with us for nearly, let's see, we're talking about 2.5 hours at the very least. We still have 200 individuals with us. I hope that I know that this was very informative. I hope this was useful for your purposes. I'm sure there may be several other questions that remain, but I would urge you to use the contact information that Chris provided, and know always that IJIS, the working group, Gerard, anyone from our team are part of the resources available to you, and we are here to support your cause.